First of all, thanks to everybody for being here today, and thanks to the Bridgeville Fire Department for allowing us to use their space here today. I'm State Representative Jason Ortitay. You're currently in my district here in Bridgeville, PA. But before we get started, I just want to do a few housekeeping items here. Remember, we are broadcasting live, and this is being recorded, so make your mothers proud. Also, cell phones, if you can, mute them, put them on vibrate, turn them off, whatever works for you, just make sure there's no sound. Also, as a reminder, as you can see, we have a few reps that aren't quite here yet. Some reps have other meetings throughout the state. They will be here. They'll be coming and going as we have the hearing. If they get up and leave in the middle of your testimony, it's not about you, so don't feel bad. This tends to happen throughout hearings in Harrisburg as well. So with that said, I will let my fellow colleagues here introduce themselves before we get started. So we'll start with Chris.
Thank you, and thank you, Jason, for hosting this. Next week, I'm Chris Dush, by the way, State Representative from Jefferson, Indiana County, and I will be hosting the third of these hearings in my own district up in Brookville next Tuesday. But I want to thank those of you who have come out to testify, as well as those who have come out just to lend your support. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aaron Bernstein. I am in Beaver, Butler, and Lawrence County, about an hour away from here. First and foremost, I wanted to thank Representative Ortitay for putting this together. This is absolutely no easy feat to do so thank you, Jason, for not only putting this together, but also your leadership on ensuring that people out here today, their taxes remain where they are, and we're diligent with every single penny that we spend in Harrisburg. Thanks so much for the panelists today, or those that will testify, and then most importantly, the people that are here. I think when you look around and people took time out of their day, in the middle of a day, on a work day to come, it just shows the importance that we need to be spending every single penny that is your money very wisely. And I look forward to hearing from people today and us discussing this in a very open fashion.
49th District, parts of Washington and Fayette, the Mon Valley, Rep. Bud Cook. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to serve and represent you all in Harrisburg. Our feedback in the district, I took a poll at a town hall meeting and nobody raised their hand when I asked them if they wanted me to raise their taxes. So I think you're kind of looking at a united front up here, but we're interested and thank the panelists.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Walsh. I am a state representative for the 58th Legislative District, which is encompassed in Westmoreland County. And I'd like to also thank Jason, Representative Ortitay, for inviting me to sit up here and take part in this discussion, if you want to call it that. And I'd like to thank the panel for joining us, and also the people out in the audience. And as Representative Cook said, I know where my constituents stand. I've been flooded with calls and emails in regard to the proposed revenue package that I guess will be in front of the House here within the next few weeks or so. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys and seeing what your thoughts are. Thank you very much.
And thank you guys. Just to kind of level set the agenda here, what I'm going to do is I'll give a brief overview, and I will be brief. People who know me know I'm not very long-winded. And then we'll turn it over to the testifiers. We'll ask questions back and forth, and we'll just go down the line here for everybody. Just a reminder to those testifying, make sure you push the button and your green light's on for your mic when you are testifying. If you want to take a break, you can always just turn it off. So just throwing that out there. We're here today to talk about the Senate's tax proposal that was passed a few weeks ago. Within that proposal, there was a gross receipts tax on natural gas, raised taxes on telecoms, transportation, on electricity, a severance tax, an additional sales tax. There was also a provision for a reduction in tax appeal period and a tax on fireworks, which pretty much came out of nowhere. So what we're here today is to discuss the impacts of those taxes if they were to go into place. I can assure you that I believe most of the people up here, if not all of them, oppose these taxes. And that's why we're here today, is to discuss those. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Beth Ann to let her start her testimony.
asking, can you hear me? There we go. Now we're on. All right, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And before we get started talking about the Senate plan, I just want to thank all of you and your participation in the Taxpayer Caucus in Harrisburg. It's probably one of the most exciting developments in Harrisburg over the last couple of years. For anybody in the audience, if you've spent any time in the building, you know the place is loaded up with special interests, with people who have access to the levers of government, and they are in there every single day asking for more dollars from the citizens of Pennsylvania. So to have champions like you in the building looking for ways to make the government work effectively and efficiently without draining the pockets of every single Pennsylvanian is very exciting. We look forward to continuing to work with you on that. As the representative noted, I'm Beth Ann Mumford. I'm State Director of Americans for Prosperity, Pennsylvania. We're a grassroots organization here in Pennsylvania, really dedicated to the values and ideals of a free society. Our job is to empower and engage citizens to work with their lawmakers to advance good policy. In our view, good policy ultimately would mean limiting the size and scope of government so Pennsylvanians can use their dollars to direct them in the ways that each of them sees fit. We can only help others if we're in a position to help ourselves, and we're not in a position to help ourselves if we have to continue to hand more dollars over to Harrisburg instead of being able to use those dollars wisely within our households and within our communities. We have worked with activists across the state, including many here in this area over the last couple years on these issues regarding the state budget. So we very much are excited to continue to work with folks who are interested in these issues. So we look at this two ways. We can grow government or we can grow the economy, but we can't do both. And the Senate plan to raise taxes, broad-based taxes on almost every Pennsylvania household is going to grow government. It's not going to grow our economy. And as we look at that plan, there's not much in it to help produce the kind of jobs that citizens need. There's not much in it to make sure that government is working wiser and better for the citizens of this state. We talk about the fireworks tax. I've been a big advocate of freeing up fireworks for citizens across this Commonwealth, but that shouldn't come at the expense of adding additional taxes on top of those products for citizens to buy. The Senate plan basically is a bailout for Harrisburg, and the last thing Harrisburg needs is a bailout from taxpayers who are already struggling. It's not just these taxes that are on the table that will increase their phone bill, their gas bill, their natural gas bill, their electric bill. Those taxes are going to raise the cost of living for everybody across this state if those were to become enacted. They're actually going to also impact our ability to grow the economy. We have the 5th highest unemployment rate in the country. Other states are eating our lunch because they've figured out how to reform government, lower taxes, make government work better for citizens. They are seeing growth in their revenue. They're seeing citizens move to their states. We're not seeing any of that, and this plan is not going to move us in that direction. The thing that we talk to folks the most about when it comes to this Senate plan is that we wouldn't be here if Harrisburg really looked at restraining spending. We have seen no move to restrain spending year over year. We continue to spend more money than we take in, and that's just not responsible government. There's plenty of blame to go around, but we have the opportunity to move in a different direction, and that's what we're looking forward to working with you and others in the House to really take a look at the budget and see if there are things that we can do to move in a better direction. Back in February, we put about $3 billion worth of cuts into the conversation, including $800 million a year we spend on corporate welfare, things like the film tax credit, where we pay $65 million annually for businesses to produce movies in Pennsylvania. The return on that is about 14 cents per dollar that we spend. So while there's a good effort to argue that this is very important, what we're doing is we're driving up the cost of government. We're placing more burden on taxpayers so that we can move money out of the out of the coffers into the hands of special interests who have lobbyists in Harrisburg and can claim those dollars. Not to mention, not too long ago, there was a report that many of those dollars aren't even going to produce films because they're selling those tax credits to existing Pennsylvania companies that don't produce movies at all. So we're not recruiting those movies in, we're just taking those dollars out of the economy and moving them into the hands of others. We need robust economic growth in Harrisburg and across the state. We have a very, very exciting opportunity in Pennsylvania to make bold choices. This is a state that people should want to come to, and yet last year we lost 41,000 residents, including 8,000 young people. That is not good for our future if we're going to drive people out of our state because of our high tax burden, instead of enticing people to come here because this is a place of opportunity, of economic growth, a place where entrepreneurs and innovators can invest their dollars and really create something. And we want young people to stay here. That's the future of Pennsylvania, to have young people who are educated here to stay here, to work in their communities, to produce the kind of well-being that we all want for our communities across Pennsylvania. Making life more expensive for citizens across the Commonwealth is not the right approach. We look forward to you rejecting the taxes in the Senate plan, those taxes and any other taxes, because once we continue to raise taxes, we get further and further away from the kind of reforms that are going to make Pennsylvania better, because those bailouts for Harrisburg don't do anything to move our Commonwealth forward. We hear that from the citizens that we work with, the activists. We're grateful for the work you're doing, and with that, I will end my comments.
All right, thank you. Also, I just want to note for the record that we've been joined by Representative Eric Nelson, Westmoreland County, right? Thank you for being here. Anybody up here have questions for Beth? Go ahead.
Beth Ann, you've been around for a few years now, and you mentioned the difference in the legislature with the people who are coming in, and I'd like you to expand a little bit on that. You know, you are right. Walking around the halls, there are people, as the mayor of Lancaster once told me, he said, when you're in these offices, people don't shake hands anymore like this. They shake hands like this. And there's a tremendous amount of truth with that. And what are you seeing as far as the difference with the people who are coming in here over the last 6-8 years, and what do you see as the trend?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we look at, as an organization, issues of economic freedom with the idea that if we don't have broad economic freedom, all the other measures that we look at to determine whether or not we've got good well-being are in place. So when we look at lawmakers, you know, we ask ourselves, who are champions for economic freedom? And we have, over the last several elections, quite frankly, seen real reformers come into Harrisburg. There are still people up there who are interested in the status quo. It's very transactional. People aren't really interested in big reforms. They're interested in moving the puzzle pieces around so that everybody wins. But at the end of the day, taxpayers aren't winning in that scenario. So folks like you, folks in other parts of the state as well, just even over the last 4 to 6 years, are up there to make a difference, to really change the way things are done and to move the Commonwealth forward. That was not the case even 10 years ago. And we look at our list of economic freedom fighters, it's grown. We don't have a majority yet, but it's growing, and we're able to influence the conversation. And it's going to take citizens really continuing to talk to you guys in the districts and getting engaged, because for every one of us, you know, myself and our staff who's in Harrisburg, there are, 30 special interests interested in the exact same issue who are outnumbering us in that building every day, and they don't care about the impact on the citizens in this town or other towns. They only care about the impact for their special interests and whether or not they're going to get the money they want or the rules that they want. And all of that comes at a cost for everybody else. We should have a tax system that is the most fair to the greatest number of people, and we don't have that right now. But we do have reformers who are fighting for that.
Representative Walsh.
Thank you. Beth Ann, I know you talked about, you said there was a proposal from your group of about $3 billion in restraint spending for the government, and you talked about primarily corporate welfare, which you identified about $800 million. And I do get emails from you guys and your policy updates, so I know a few of the other areas that you looked at, but just for informational purposes, maybe you can expand on that just a little bit, give us a couple more ideas, or even comparing us to other states.
Sure. So we have the highest amount of corporate welfare annually that we spend compared to other states across this country. And corporate welfare are dollars that come out of taxpayers' pockets into the government to allow the government to pick winners and losers. That film tax credit is one. The racehorse fund, $250 million a year there. There are a number of items under that $800 million that are dollars that the individual industries claim that without them, they're not going to be able to function in our economy. But the truth is, if you need that kind of government assistance to stay afloat, then you probably don't have a business model that's working anyway. And we shouldn't have the government picking winners and losers. Other things we've looked at is privatizing the liquor system here in Pennsylvania. I know the House has passed several bills to do that, not just this year, but over the last couple years. We are only one of 2 states in the nation where the government controls the entire system for sale of alcohol, both the wholesale and generally the retail side. We've seen some reforms on that side, which have been good for citizens, obviously. But currently, the government controls both the wholesale resale side. They collect taxes, they set prices, that limits choice and raises costs for consumers, and it keeps entrepreneurs and innovators out of a marketplace. It's government jobs that are filling that need. They're deciding, what the marketplace should look like. They're not giving space for innovators and entrepreneurs to come in. People to really. I saw yesterday that in Beijing they have vending machines where you can get whiskey and wine and beer. So China is much more innovative than Pennsylvania is, and that's because the government runs our liquor system. There are, I think the bills passed by the House. The estimate is a couple $100 million that could go towards the budget. Overall, privatizing that system, the estimates are up to $1 billion if we just got the government out of it and let private industry do that. The private industry is going to be able to collect the same taxes that the government collects now, but it won't require taxpayers to cover all of the overhead for managing those stores. The governor actually has had some go time savings that we included on our list, but he hasn't looked at those as a way to put money back. He's looked at those as a way to just continue to spend more. So where he's found savings within the administration, he's used that money for other things within the administration. We'd prefer that money just comes back to taxpayers instead of expanding there. I'm trying to remember because I don't have the list in front of me, but those are, a couple examples of things that we could do right away to take money out of the budget that's not necessary spending that would be able to put us in a position where we wouldn't have to raise taxes on anybody.
Thank you.
And I'm sure all of us have heard in Harrisburg, at least through the halls of the Capitol, that from members of the other party and appropriation staff, that the government's cut to the bone, right? But Beth, as you presented, there's several $1 billion still on the table there for reform.
Well, several $1 billion on the table for reform. There's money sitting in accounts in Harrisburg that's not being spent, that taxpayers have already sent to Harrisburg. That could help. The other thing I saw the other day from one of the groups in Harrisburg, they talked about the taxes that the Senate just passed. Well, it's only $100 a year for a person who makes $40,000. So as a mom, I look at that $100 and I think, what could I do with that better than Harrisburg? That's the Little League registration fee in my town, $100. So if I had to send that $100 to Harrisburg, that's $100 I don't have to spend on something that's important to me and my family. There are probably a million other things that we could all think about what we could do with the $100. So I resent that argument, oh, government's already cut and what's it to you? It's just a little bit more money out of your pocket. Well, that's my money. That's our money. And we are much better at directing it than Harrisburg. They've proven themselves not to be able to direct it well. They raised taxes last year. The governor spent $400 million than was appropriated, and we still have a deficit. So raising taxes isn't going to fix our deficit if we don't get to a point where we're being realistic about what we want government to do and where we can cut spending in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Beth, you brought up the special accounts. Chris, I know you've been working on that. I've been a part of that as well. Just a question for you about how much money is sitting in those special accounts in Harrisburg.
All told, there's over $12 billion in the special funds. Now, some of those are tied up with things, their fees that have been imposed on businesses. As we're digging into this, we're finding out that these accounts are growing and that the fees are probably exorbitant on the businesses that these are supposed to be regulating. So that's a policy decision for later, but it's something we're definitely going to be looking at as well. There are other encumbered fees. Right now, we're not ready to give what we've got totally, but you know, the governor had made the comment the other day that there's not any money there. He heard about what we're doing, the digging that we're going into, and he made the comment that that money is not there. I'm going to say it right now, that's a lie. There's no two ways of putting it, it's a lie. He never should have made the comment, because even on the Department of the Treasury's website, I've got funds here in the general fund. Forget about the special funds, the general fund. Lapse funds, some of these go back from the Public Utility Commission has got funds sitting there from 2010 to 2014, $15 million. The mental health, from 11 to 14, there's $3,849,000 sitting there for mental health centers, mental health center research, another $1.8 million. Child welfare for the counties, 12 to 14, $64,457,000 that was never driven out to the counties. 2015, $12 million that wasn't driven out to the counties. $199 million still sits there from last fiscal year. We've got some serious money sitting there. The last time I actually printed this report up, there were some going back to 1989. And I brought it up during the appropriations hearings, and we are starting to see some of that money lapsed into the general fund. But there's a lot of money there. We need to start going after it. And fortunately, we've got a group of people who are actually working very hard at that.
Representative Dust, just a point of clarification. I want to make sure that we're clear on those. That wouldn't be cuts to those programs or anything like that. Could you just clarify that is what that money is actually doing, which is nothing?
Yes, there are savings accounts and checking accounts that we basically didn't have any oversight of, and that is absolutely wrong. The legislature has not had any oversight over these funds because we'd all been told, oh, it's strictly restricted dollars. That's not the case. We are finding that at the end of a fiscal year, you see huge deposits from the checking account into the savings account so that they're not reporting what is actually available to these departments in these line items and in these special funds. We are digging into it. We are going to find the money. We are going to start making it very tough for anybody to try and raise taxes. The money is sitting there, and it's taxpayer dollars that should have been driven out to pay for the programs in the fiscal year for which they were appropriated, not sitting there for 6, 10, 15 years, 20 years in some cases. That is absolutely wrong, and it's also absolutely wrong for a bureaucrat or a bunch of bureaucrats to turn around and hide that money when the people who have sovereignty over that dollar are the people that you elect locally to take care of that. And if we don't have oversight of it and people are hiding it away and squirreling it away for their own rainy day funds, if the legislature decides they want a rainy day fund, and I think we should have some sort of an account, but it should be under the direction of your local legislature, your local legislators, so that they can see it and they can drive it out, and then you have a very direct access to that person to say, hey, you're saving way too much. you're taxing us more and socking this stuff away. You guys ought to have a lot more direct access, and we're the people that you are supposed to have direct access to take care of that.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you, Beth Ann, appreciate it. Next we have Matt Brewer.
Good afternoon. Got me? My name is Matt Brewer. I'm the president, one of the co-founders of Hydro Edge Solutions. We're a gas and oil service company located here in Washington County, I guess, down the street. We operate our office, our yard, primarily everything out of Washington County. The vast majority of our workforce is our local Pennsylvania residents. We do have some folks that come over from West Virginia and from Ohio that work with us as well. We founded the company in 2012. Started at grassroots, nothing. My wife and I took some IKEA furniture out of our house and hired one guy, and today we have about 85 employees on our staff. As I mentioned, all local. I often brag that we've never paid a relocation package at Hydro Edge, so we truly do, hire locally. 85 employees is fantastic. That's down from about 140 in 2014, which was kind of our high water mark. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with some things that happen significantly in the industry with commodity pricing, with the price of oil, the price of natural gas taking a downturn. We started to feel that early in 2015, and that continued realistically through the fourth quarter of 2016. During that time, we lost a lot of jobs, not just my company, but across the state. It seemed like every day you read another article about a company that went bankrupt or a company that had massive layoffs. I mean, some of them right up and down, I-79 here. So an indicator of that is the rig count. That's kind of what we follow. Sorry. Excuse me. I kind of wanted to talk specifically a little bit about decisions that I have to make in the very near future and some of the indicators that we use to make those decisions. The rig count in Pennsylvania in June of 2016 was at 17 rigs. Okay, that was about the low water mark. Was a year ago, a little over a year ago. The price of natural gas at that time was $2.59 an MCF. If you fast forward to June 2017 here recently, we've had an increase in our rig count in Pennsylvania. We're back up to about 34 rigs. So we've seen about a 50% increase. Another indicator is that the price of gas currently in the month of June on the Henry Hub Index was $2.98 an MCF. So realistically, only about a 12% increase in the gas prices. And on the surface, I think that looks really good. I think that we're saying a 12% increase in commodity prices equal to 50% increase in rigs, which extrapolates out to additional jobs and services for companies like mine. But what that tells me is that there's a lot of volatility in the pricing. There's a lot of volatility in the commodity pricing, and that directly impacts the services, the jobs, the size of the companies that operate here within the state. So moving forward on that conversation, we take a look at the state of Ohio, okay? And if you look at the comparable numbers for Ohio, June of 2016, they only had about 16 rigs operating 11 rigs operating in the state of Ohio. Today, they have 27. So our 50% growth Ohio has seen about a 60% uptick in the market. Okay, so I follow Pennsylvania politics very closely. I care very much about it, and I also follow Ohio politics very closely. And I read a lot of commenters. When I initially saw the proposals through the Senate bill, I was quite honestly shocked. I was shocked to see how much was added on to the natural gas industry. And I read the comments and I see people say that it's not like these guys will pack up and move. It's not like they will shut down operations here. They're too far invested. And I'm telling you that from my perspective, we might already be experiencing that. I think that the proof is in the numbers, that the fact that Ohio is growing at a faster rate than Pennsylvania is, and how that affects us is because I have decisions to make in the next 30, 60, 90 days. I mentioned that we were at 85 employees. I need to bring on an additional 40 to 60 employees, which is fantastic. But I have to really evaluate where do we make these investments? Do we make these investments in Pennsylvania? You know, we're gonna spend probably $2 to $3 million in capital improvements and purchasing additional equipment over the next 12 months. Where do we spend that money? Do we spend that money in Pennsylvania, or do we, you know, trust the numbers and say that there's going to be more growth and more opportunity for our business to succeed in a different state? Those aren't the decisions. I think it's unfair that we have to make those decisions. There's a lot of folks on our payroll. I know there's other small business owners here on this panel as well. And I think those are decisions that if I have to make those, that other folks are going to have to make those. And if my anticipated capital spend is a couple $1 million next year for just a little company, what about the customers that we work for that have an anticipated spend of $400 million, $700 million, $1 billion over the next 18 months? If a few percentage points make that big of a difference to me on a few $1 million, how big of a difference does that make to the folks that are actually creating and producing the gas that employs so many people down here? So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much, Representative Ortitay, for inviting me. And I think it echoes really what Beth Ann said about, you know, attracting business and attracting entrepreneurs to this. I don't come from a family of business people. My parents were glass factory workers that lost their jobs. They had 25 years in. They lost their jobs when I was 17 years old in one day. They had a job one day, they didn't have a job the next day. So I feel that I've seen firsthand the impacts of difficult economic decisions and challenging circumstances under which companies have to operate. And, you know, I live here. I live in Washington County. My family is here. We love it here. But I think it's utterly important that the opinions of people like myself, like our company, like the people that we employ, are heard. And it's important that everybody understands that there will be dramatic impacts to the industry that has created so many jobs here should this legislation move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Representative Ortitay. Mr. Brewer, thank you very much for your testimony. And as a small business guy, I was listening to a truck driver at Pee Wee football, 2 weeks ago, and he was touching on some of the additional layered surcharges and taxes and how they impact their company. And that trucking company had about 80 trucks, so they weren't real big. But can you touch on the impact of the fuel pricing, turnpike tolls, some of those other operational burdens that you're seeing as an employer, and how that relates when you look at maybe shifting some resources to Ohio?
Sure, and I mean that's absolutely a good point. It's when we started the company in 2012, I mean everybody's familiar with the increases that we've seen in tolls. For an example, that wasn't really a consideration when we would go to bid a job, when we would decide should we deploy our assets in Pennsylvania or in West Virginia and Ohio. Now that has to be a consideration. If we pull a trailer across through a few tolls, all of a sudden we're adding hundreds of dollars onto the bottom line on an already thin margin business, right? When you're a service company, we're basically like contractors. It's time and material, and every penny counts. So I mean that's one indication. We've battled through increasing healthcare costs. We've maintained healthcare coverage for our employees. We've provided them good plans, and it feels like every time you turn around, there's something else. There's another increase in charges that just makes it extremely difficult to continue to do business.
Thank you.
Matt, thanks so much for coming today and taking time away from your business. And 5 years from IKEA to 85 employees.
Right.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's number one. One of the math things that I always do in my head, you figure an average family of three, right? You have some single folks, you have some people that have 5 kids, and you're directly impacting 250 people every day when you go to work.
Right.
And I want you to know that I don't take that lightly, and the people up here on the stage don't take that lightly. My question is, I have a couple, but what do people in your industry that, by the way, directly impact 250, just in your company?
Right.
What do people in your industry think of Harrisburg?
That's a great question, and
And you're not going to hurt our feelings.
No. Trust me, I appreciate the compliment. Starting on that point, when people, what you just mentioned is how I quantify success. Right? It's not about top line revenue, how much pipe I have, how many horsepower of pumps. It's the figures that you just stated. It's the number of employees and the number of families that directly affects. So, to your point, thank you very much. I think that there is honestly a true lack of communication, of true understanding when it comes to the folks that are out swinging sledgehammers and driving trucks and really executing the work that needs to happen to make this industry successful. I think that additional outreach is much needed. I think that there's additional communication that could happen to really help people understand what's going on in Harrisburg, because I tell people all the time that we get so much focus on presidential and national level elections, but so many decisions are made at the local level. And quite honestly, the turnout numbers that we get, in my opinion, at the local level for every election are appalling. The fact that people don't understand, they don't show up to the polls, they don't know necessarily what they're voting for or who they're voting for other than along party lines, I think is a problem. And there's people that they're directly, this is a perfect example of a time when decisions that you can make, at the polling booth will impact maybe whether you even have a job or not. I think that's the level that we're talking about here today. I genuinely believe that that this is not a long-term problem. This is a short-term problem that has to be addressed.
What, on a scale of 1 to 10, what rank Harrisburg in general and politicians in Harrisburg in general on if you believe that they will do the best thing for you and your 85 employees, 1 to 10?
That's tough. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have somewhat of a platform because I have relationships with folks like yourselves. I stay involved as much as I possibly can with running a business. So I believe that, not to tie a specific number to it, but I believe that, that there are opportunities there that people genuinely want to do the right thing. But I feel like with our region here specifically, that so many decisions get made by folks on the other side of the state that do not see the direct impact. And not to defend those folks at all, but if you're not here and you don't see it and you don't see what happens on a day-to-day basis, then I can understand why it might be easy to say, add a tax onto that industry. We can raise money that way.
Thanks, Matt. And I can't speak for my colleagues up here, but I can tell you in our conversations, you have a group of people here that will do every single thing in our power to make sure that you and your employees stay right here in Western Pennsylvania. Those 85 directly, the 250 almost just one step away, and the thousands and thousands. So thank you so much for what you do, for laying it all on the line 5 years ago. And, it's people like you that really make this country and this Commonwealth a fantastic place to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Matt, thanks for your testimony and taking our questions. Next up, Sandy. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you.
Hi. I guess I get to be the average person here. Good afternoon. The taxes proposed in the Senate are not in touch with many Pennsylvania residents. I have been married for 40 years. We own our own home. We have always lived within our means. We have one credit card with a low balance and no car payment. Between utility bills, car insurance, life insurance, health insurance, and absurd school taxes and food, we live paycheck to paycheck. My husband became disabled in 1989 while we had 3 small kids aged 9 and under. I went to work for 25 years as a school bus driver and made the absurd amount of $11,000 a year by the time I retired, with no benefits or retirement. Between his disability, pension, and Social Security and my income at that time was $31,000. My husband is diabetic, and the past 2 years when he got into the donut hole of his insurance, his insulin alone was nearly $500 a month. We make too much money for any type of help. He had to ration 1 month of insulin to last 3 months. Our grown daughters actually supplied us with groceries during this hardship. These tax increases on our utility bills are just another hardship we would have to endure. Households that live paycheck to paycheck that struggle to pay their utility bills now may soon have to choose to pay them or something else. $10 here and $10 there matter to many of us. The new severances taxes on the gas industry will not hurt the industry as much as the gas owner. Gas leases include deductions for fees and taxes. With all the cuts in funding, the impact fees that townships have collected have supplemented these losses. Without them, many townships will not be able to budget many projects that depend on these fees. Currently, we have a gas lease for our measly 1 acre of ground. Last week, we received our first royalty check. Out of $288, we received $175, $113 taken out for fees. That is 39% taken from us. That does not include the income taxes we will have to pay on top of this. So the poor leaseholder, if they are lucky, get 18% minus all the fees and taxes, while the gas companies are making 82%. If these taxes are added to the industry, they will in turn be taken from the royalties. The gas owner will be getting nothing. What other industry does this? Coal was extracted from landowners, and they got paid outright for that coal. There were not extraction fees, and all taxes levied on the coal industry is taken from it. Those fees were passed on to the consumer of the coal. Why does the gas industry feel that all these are owner expenses? What are their expenses? It is time to cut spending, not raise taxes on the residents. The state needs to do more about pension crisis. You need to reduce the size of government and reduce car, housing, and office expenses. You need to do more about the way schools spend our tax dollars, not only property taxes, but the state funding as well. As a past school board director, I can vouch for the overspending by board members that are relatives or current or retired teachers. You are all smart people, and I am sure you have many more ideas as to how to reduce spending, some more painful than others, but necessary if this budget crisis is to end.
Thank you, Sandy. Just for everybody out there and everybody watching online, Sandy has been communicating with me. She lives in Canton Township and has been really good as far as providing feedback during this budget, as far as the last 2 budgets that I've been involved with as well. And I really appreciate you coming here and sharing your story with us and how it impacts the average person. Anybody up here have any questions?
Sandy, I'm really grateful for your testimony. It's interesting, as part of this Senate proposal, they recognized it was going to be a negative impact on people such as yourself, in that they wrote $20 million worth of increases to the LIHEAP program in order to pay for the additional costs that it was going to accrue to low-income families. And it's interesting, they still haven't let us know as to whether or not that's just to cover the additional cost to the people that are currently enrolled, or are they also trying to factor in those who are going to end up being on the program? Because unfortunately, with this, the way this tax is set up, they haven't given real specificity on the gross receipts tax for electricity producers. So if you got a gross receipts tax on the natural gas, and then the sales tax is added on top of it, then the or the electric providers that are using natural gas pay those 2 taxes plus add their own gross receipts tax, and then a sales tax is computed on all 3 of those taxes. Now you've got a tax on a tax on a tax on a tax. Then the next thing you know, your phone bills and your communications, your cable, whatever, they're paying all 4 of those taxes just to get the electricity to provide all the necessary equipment to get that signal to you. So they add their gross receipts tax, and on top of that comes the sales tax. So you get taxed 6 times before you end up paying for it. But you also touched on your school taxes. Your school is going to end up having to pay for that as well. All of those except for the final sales tax. Now, they're going to end up having to raise your property taxes in order to pay for that stuff. I've computed just for the Department of Corrections alone, it's going to cost $3 million for us in additional costs for our heat, electricity, and telecommunications. So the state's going to end up turning around and having, with all our other facilities, to raise taxes again next fiscal year to pay for the taxes we've imposed on ourselves. This is getting absurd. This bill does not look more than 5 seconds past the people's noses. I thank you for your testimony, and you've hit some very important things.
Representative Cook.
Sandy, thank you so very much. I have a bad habit. These guys up here usually tell me about it. I tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And in the 49th, I refer to all my constituents as my bosses. And I had the honor and the pleasure of going around and talking to about 20,000 of my bosses. And let me tell you what, we have it backwards in government. The politician does not come before the constituents. And we need to kind of turn that around, and everywhere I go, I applaud people like yourself or people that are in business. I call it the retail mentality. All anybody ever sees us do in business is collect money. So we must be rich. And we finally got the message across, no new taxes. So what do we try to do? We try to bury all these fees, just like the representative said. You know what that is? That's being pecked to death by a duck. It's about the spending. We all live within our budgets, all within our means. We need to do that at the government level. Folks, we need to demand more of our elected officials. Matt, all your employees need to get on the phone, do the emails, whatever. We get motivated when we get lots of emails and a lot of telephone calls. Demand more. Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Sandy. Really appreciate you being here today. Elizabeth, turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks for having the Commonwealth Foundation participate in this informal hearing, I guess. We were out there in Cumberland County a couple weeks ago, so hopefully I'll say something new and different and won't put everyone to sleep today. My name is Elizabeth Stell. I'm Director of Policy Analysis for the Commonwealth Foundation, which is based in Harrisburg, but I live out here in Lawrence County. And there's a lot of great people with railroad experience that can explain to you how these taxes are going to impact their daily lives. So I wanted to step back and just look at the big picture, not so much even what's going to happen this year, but why are we in this situation every single year? And what can we do to break out of this situation? And I can go into some more specifics on the solutions that we've been talking about and that members of the Taxpayer Caucus are already working with us on. So we're very excited to see what transpires in the House over the next few weeks. So we've talked a little bit about high unemployment, corporate welfare, but the real problem in Pennsylvania is lack of economic growth. And I think the best way to illustrate this is to look at the migration numbers. When you look at college-educated students in Pennsylvania, our graduates, they're leaving at a rate of 36 every single day to find a job at another state. So if you're asking, how's our economic growth, that's a pretty good indicator that it's not good. And I could give you a lot of other numbers, but that's the reason we always have such a big gap between what we think we're going to take in revenue and what we actually take in revenues, because we're not compensating for the lack of growth in Pennsylvania. So how do we generate more economic growth? Well, taxes have the exact opposite impact. Again, these are basics. I think we agree on this, but I think it's important to note and explain how these things all work together. We've hiked taxes 4 times in the last 9 years, and yet almost all those years we've had battles over how are we going to balance this budget without hiking taxes. A great example is what happened last year. 40% wholesale tax on e-cigarettes, okay? Pretty narrow tax, not affecting most people day to day. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal was about 100 vape shops across the Commonwealth have gone out of business since that time period. So not only are you raising taxes, you're slowing the economic growth. So you're making the problem worse. So you're going to end up with a bigger gap the next year. So just some context I think is important for everyone to understand and to keep in mind when we're talking about the budget battles year after year after year, because it's easy to get stuck on what you're facing this year. What is the impact of this particular tax hike plan? About $180 per family of 4. And I could get into the specifics of all the different taxes, but suffice to say it taxes everyone except maybe our Amish friends who don't use electricity and heat their homes with natural gas. So other than that, pretty broad-based, about as broad-based as you can get. Okay, so what does that mean on the job front? I really appreciated the testimony about the natural gas industry because that's real-world impacts. Sandy, what that means for your family budget, real-world impacts. We did some economic modeling to look at what is that impact across the entire state. We estimate about 3,600 jobs will be lost if the Senate tax hike plan goes into effect. That's just in the first year. That doesn't necessarily mean 3,600 people are going to lose their jobs, but it means those jobs either won't be created or there may be some layoffs that occur. But on an aggregate, you're going to lose that amount of jobs. You're going to lose about $142 million in investment. So when you talk about companies deciding what state they're going to invest in, all right, that's an indication that companies are going to invest elsewhere. Disposable income, a loss of $932 million. So that's just, people going out for an ice cream cone or all those little purchases that stimulate these small businesses, gone. And if people talk about, it's a revenue problem, it's not a spending problem, we've already mentioned the phrase cut to the bone. Just want to throw out some numbers to put this in context here. We've spent $2.9 billion in additional monies just since Governor Wolf has been in office. That's more than the prior 8 years combined. So we're dramatically accelerating the rate of our spending. So not only are we not cutting spending, we're growing the spending far faster than we have been in the past. So no question about it that we are not taxed too little. We are spending too much. Last year alone, we increased general fund spending by $1.8 billion. So we can't keep up with it. And the more taxes you pass, the slower economic growth, the less economic growth occurs, and that cycle just perpetuates itself. So what are we going to do about it? What's the solution? How do we change the tide? Beth Ann already mentioned a couple of things. Along those lines, we call it the special funds, outside the general fund, we call it the shadow budget. Sounds more ominous and gets people intrigued. The shadow budget. And the $3 billion was mentioned, the funds that we think we can really focus in. Horse racing's already been mentioned, but again, I just want to stress $250 million to a very narrow special interest. I mean, this shouldn't even be a debate. The Keystone Parks and Recreation Fund, $95 million. Funding a golf course feasibility study or raising taxes on families. I don't think there's much of a choice there. A couple other things, the special mass transit funds that could be looked at, more tax credits, recycling fund. And again, I'm not pointing out saying that these funds need to be eliminated. I'm saying these are funds that have large balances or are ripe for reprioritization. Maybe they can go towards filling the one-time gap from last year. But let's be more transparent about where we are spending the dollars and be more intentional about prioritizing our dollars before we go back to the taxpayers year after year, because that obviously is not working. And so if you have more detailed questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I just wanted to focus pretty generally today on the situation in front of us and some ways we can fix it. Liquor's already been mentioned, but something that hasn't been mentioned yet and I think is important to note, and it's actually a good part of the Senate proposal, is work requirements for our Medicaid program. Okay, Medicaid is one of the, if not the largest cost driver in our budget. So if you want the biggest bang for your buck, reform Medicaid. Get those people to a state where they can afford private insurance, and you're going to see a dramatic difference in the budget situation that you're looking at. So we're actually conducting a study right now to figure out what does Medicaid work requirements look like in terms of savings, but more importantly, and most importantly, in terms of increased income for individuals, in terms of moving people out of the welfare system, breaking the cycle of dependency. So that we hope remains in any fiscal code bill because we think it's incredibly important. that welfare reform and education reform, for that matter, remain in these conversations, because those are two long-term efforts that may not result in, a couple $1 million to plug holes right now, but are going to put you in a much better situation in the future and prevent the same vicious cycle that we've seen take over Pennsylvania in the past few years.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. I had a question. You brought up the shadow budget. A lot of people may not be aware. Our budget this year was around $32 billion. If you factor in the shadow budget that goes along with that, what is Pennsylvania's total spending as a state this year?
Roughly over $80 billion, just over $80 billion, complete cost. Now, that includes federal funds that come to Pennsylvania and are spent in our state.
All right. And I know Beth Ann talked about this a little bit earlier, but when it comes to unemployment, I know that we're lagging behind, but how do we shape up against our bordering states?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you historically, Pennsylvania is at the national average, and the last few years we've been below the national average. So something on the trend line is changing, and changing for the worse.
Representative Dowling?
Elizabeth, in the Beacon Hill model that you were referring to, I know that there was $932 million in projected less in disposable income. Could you maybe expound upon or speak to the industries that could slow growth in, or how that would affect Pennsylvania? I don't know if you ran that model out that far, but that just seems like it's a large amount that would be going into industries throughout the Commonwealth.
Yeah. Basically, it's another way of talking about the $180 that will go away from every family of four. It's pointing out that when you have less disposable income, when you lose that $100 for Little League or whatever you're going to use it on, that has dramatic impacts. It has a ripple effect across the economy. So we're not able to drill down and say which industries are going to be hardest hit, but most likely you would see, your service industries, entertainment industries, things that are disposable, things that aren't essential, things that hire a lot of people, that would be most hit by those small incremental tax increases. And I would note too that while 180 doesn't sound a lot right now, keep in mind that we have the 15th highest tax burden, or 11th highest, depending on your measure already. So we're already towards the top in terms of the burden on taxpayers.
Just as a follow-up, and I know we're kind of speculating on the industries that would be hit hardest, would it be fair to say that those families that are maybe in more economically deprived areas or working in, for example, low-paying jobs would probably be hit the hardest?
It's possible. It's hard to say, but we do know that many of these taxes on utilities tend to be regressive. So the people that are going to have the hardest decisions to make are going to be those people at the lower income, because they're not going to be able to simply overlook, an additional, $10 in their natural gas bill. I believe we estimated a very, very rough back of the envelope average, about $60 increase in your natural gas bill. And I would also point out that the natural gas gross receipts tax is actually a comeback tax, or zombie tax maybe, which you want to call it. It was in existence in 2000 when it expired. And so bringing back old taxes is not just the wrong direction. I mean, it's incredibly destructive, and something that I think everyone here, but again, I just want to stress, is absolutely the wrong way and is not going to solve anything.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate you being here. We'll move on to David. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, my name is Dave Cranston, and I'm president and owner of our family business. I'm the third generation owner of Cranston Material Handling Equipment. We're located in McKees Rocks and employ about 10 people. There's that better. I'm the past chairman of NFIB's Pennsylvania Leadership Council, and still serve on that board. So I speak today not only on my own business and my business's customers, but broadly on behalf of NFIB's 14,000 Pennsylvania members. I would like to thank the Taxpayers Caucus for taking time to learn more from the small business community. which is a major contributor to Pennsylvania's economic health and employment. I appreciate the caucus's focus on taxpayers and how state government can most efficiently and effectively perform its duties while keeping tax rates low to spur economic growth and investment. Taxes are, as you all know, a top priority for small businesses. We simply cannot pass them along to our customers, all the costs of doing business like many larger businesses can. To small businesses, higher taxes means less money to raise wages, offer better benefits, and to create new jobs or reinvest in our businesses. As a result, it's important to discuss ways to simplify the tax code and compliance process, make state tax rules consistent with federal law, and reduce corporate and personal tax rates to spur economic activity and generate additional tax revenue. We were asked today to comment on tax provisions of the revenue package most recently passed by the Senate, which provides about $2.2 billion in funding, including about $570 million in new taxes, higher tax rates, and HB 542, the Senate's revenue plan, especially the gross receipts tax on energy, telecommunications, and transportation, will be particularly harmful to small businesses by increasing their cost of doing business. It also reduces the funds, and this is what the gentleman down to the right of me was saying, that larger companies have who are our customers, who have to buy or who do buy our goods and services. Smaller businesses create 2 out of every 3 net new jobs and employ almost half of Pennsylvania's private workforce. Most of these businesses do not have the ability to pass these taxes on to their customers and will be forced to absorb much of it. That results in less money to hire employees or invest in their companies, increasing our costs at a time when we should be focused on investing in and growing our economy would be a mistake. For energy-intensive small businesses that rely on natural gas for manufacturing or production, where energy cost represents a large portion of overall cost of doing business, the tax increases in HB 542 will be immense. We sell our industrial equipment to many companies who use large quantities of natural gas. This tax will make it more difficult for them to justify equipment purchases in the future, and in many cases, cause companies to move production to other plants. I would like to offer a specific example of another NFIB Pennsylvania member, the former chairman of our Leadership Council, Douglas Henry, of Henry Molded Products in Lebanon County. Doug operates his manufacturing company on natural gas. He faces the drastic 5.7% tax increase on that energy source, which he says would add a minimum increased business cost of $57,000 a year. Doug just built a new production line and is about to add 7 new employees. When that line is operational, the annual cost of this proposed tax would be much higher. There is space for Henry Molded to expand even further, but due to the Senate plan, Doug is seriously considering future expansion at his South Carolina location instead of Pennsylvania. As this example illustrates, this tax reaches the level of being punitive, which is not good for our state's economy or jobs. Here, on the west side of the state, many small businesses like ours service the natural gas industry. Adding a gross receipts tax and a severance tax on top of the impact tax would be harmful to us because it means the drilling companies will have fewer dollars to spend on goods and services that they purchase locally. For companies like mine, when there are fewer dollars available to spend, there will be fewer sales opportunities and therefore fewer sales. In aggregate, Pennsylvania's small businesses will lose millions of dollars in sales if the legislature further burdens this new industry with these taxes. Low natural gas prices have been a bright spot in Pennsylvania's struggling economy over the past few years for many businesses. Low energy costs are an incredibly invaluable incentive. And I just want to say that again because I think the legislature misses that. Low energy costs are an incredible, valuable incentive for attracting or retaining industry and jobs in Pennsylvania. The legislature needs to act to improve this competitive advantage, not negate it, and thereby forcing businesses to consider locating elsewhere when they want to move or expand. Low energy costs benefit all Pennsylvanians. Now I'd like to turn to another element of the Senate plan. Potential changes to Pennsylvania's tax appeals process and HB 542 are also very concerning. In 2013, after significant legislative changes were made to this process, the Council on State Taxation declared Pennsylvania the most improved state in the nation for tax appeals. HB 542 would reverse much of this improvement. HB 542 shortens the tax appeal period from 90 to 60 days, grants the Department of Revenue unilateral authority to hold cases in abeyance, prevents appeals for summary claims orders, and generally makes it more difficult for taxpayers to comply. To improve compliance with state tax laws, the General Assembly should seek to make it easier for businesses, not harder. These changes seem to be moving Pennsylvania in the opposite direction. The function of the function of collection of sales taxes that companies are required to do for the state is already a costly exercise for small businesses like mine. When Cranston Material Handling sells equipment, we often must pay the sales tax to the state in advance of actually collecting payment. Most business-to-business sales are transacted when the seller, by the seller invoicing the buyer. Due to the tough business climate, many buyers take 60 to 90 days to pay the invoice. However, the state requires my business to pay the tax in as little as 20 days from the date of the invoice. So for an example, on an invoice of $10,000, the sales tax will be $700. We then, more often than not, have to pay the $700 to the state before we receive payment. On hundreds of thousands of dollars of sales a month, this becomes a significant burden. Last year, the state saw fit to take away our 2% discount for timely remittance of tax. So now companies like mine receive up to $25 to finance the prepayment of the sales tax. The point of my example is how the state sales tax policies can and do have the unintended consequences of hurting small businesses and making the state less business friendly. It is also unclear from the tax appeal process from where the projected $40 million in revenue would come from, and I would be curious what assumptions underlie this assumption. The cost of tax paperwork is the most expensive burden that government imposes on small business owners, as much as $74 per hour in tax preparation and compliance costs. This bill will only further increase this burden on Pennsylvania's businesses. The focus now should be on growing Pennsylvania's economy, not on raising taxes and tax burdens for job creators. Legislators cannot forget that taking more tax dollars hurts small businesses and families, which we've already heard here today. However, when the focus is on growing the economy, jobs and tax revenues will follow. To grow the economy, the state's tax policy must be competitive with other states, conform to federal standards when possible, and remove barriers to growth and investment. Other states have addressed state pension deficits, cut spending, and made tax changes to improve the business climate. We would like to see Pennsylvania do the same. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to address you today.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Representative Ortitay, and thank you very much for your testimony. You really hit on a number of key factors and also some substantial frustration that we're fighting in Harrisburg. One of the biggest surprises that I had in coming to Harrisburg was that the quality of individual was much higher than I thought was going to be there. Sorry, fellas, but my impression was that it would be there would be a much seedier, maybe a little bit slimy, a little bit underhanded element, and there's a little bit of that out there. But I think, all told, the legislators on both sides of the aisle are very well intended, but they also have a significant lacking of the business experience, and there's comfort in taxes. The term that we say in Harrisburg is, well, this need for recurring revenue. But so many of the legislature are not coming from the business world, and so their recurring revenue is annual taxes. And to me, the best recurring revenue is a strong paying job. You touched on an excellent feature about making Pennsylvania taxes consistent with the IRS. And we were able to establish some bipartisan success this year in the House and have it passed the second consideration for Section 179 deductions for small businesses. And when I was a small business owner, I thought that all Pennsylvania businesses were limited in their reinvestment. And then as I began working on the bill and taking over the reins from Representative Dunbar, Pennsylvania is the only state in the country that taxes small business differently than their corporations. And so some of what would be extremely helpful for us as legislatures moving forward is to have, and pass the word, to have more business owners like yourself invest that time to educate about the importance. Because the second factor, which was somewhat touched on during the Commonwealth Foundation's testimony, was the impact of studies, because there are a lot of studies done. One of the absence of impacts that I see is that the modeling software that the state uses is outdated. It is a tax and spend model basis, and it lacks what's referred to as dynamic modeling, or the ability to even recognize the possibility of abundance. So what happens when the government analyzes Section 179 deduction, meaning that yourself or Steel Dynamics or any employer purchases a new piece of equipment, whether you deduct that in 1 year or you deduct it in 5 years, it's still the same amount of deduction. So that would be a revenue neutral situation, and actually a revenue positive, because when you buy something, you're hiring concrete guys, it's new lighting, you put on a new bay. None of that information is able to be captured. And so the well-intended legislature isn't even able to see or have a dialogue that is growth-based or abundance-based, because they're not given the tools to even debate it. So I very much appreciate, your testimony, the need for Pennsylvania to embrace abundance and have a little bit of a courage to realize it'll be there. And the last part of that element that I'd like for you potentially to touch on is some of the dialogue that we've been driving is for Pennsylvania to create a predictive pathway, instead of a single-year budget or a single-year plan, to create a pathway to say, hey, this would be our 3-year tax plan in this area, or this would be the intention. Can you talk on the benefit of maybe government being able to kind of forecast some of the direction they would be heading as you look at reinvestment for your company, sir?
Well, certainly when it comes to depreciation, if we know what the depreciation is going to be, or that it's consistent with the federal, then that just helps us to be able to discern, hey, do I have the cash in order to do it? From a practical matter, businesses are all, or not all, but you like to be predictive. I can kind of predict what my sales are going to be next year, and it would seem to me the state can do exactly the same thing. You can forecast about where you're going to be next year, so it should inform your decisions today and your tax policies today. So moving forward to a predictive model, I think would be tremendous for the Commonwealth, and it would allow them to just, avoid a lot of this brinkmanship and bring some certainty to a lot of funding of a lot of programs that always at the end of the year are in question as whether they're going to get refunded or how our funding is going to be impacted.
Thank you, and thank you, David. I appreciate you being here today. I also want to recognize that Representative Seth Grove has joined us. He gets the award for the longest drive today from York County. He got to experience the Parkway today probably for the first time, so welcome to the western part of the state.
It's good to be back in Championship City.
I also want to note that Representative Grove is the chair of the Taxpayer Caucus, which is bicameral, and I appreciate him being here and making the drive down here to the 46th district here. So thank you, Seth. Now we're going to move on to Michael, and just a funny story before you start. I promise I won't embarrass you.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I actually met Michael as a lot of my colleagues do. We show up at schools and we talk to classes from time to time. And there was one particular student there who you could tell right away had a real interest in an elected official coming, because he just had a ton of questions, which is great, because since then, that was at least a year?
That was in November, right before the election.
Right. So since then, Michael, he'll send me a message every now and then, and we'll chat politics, which is nice because my wife doesn't like to talk politics with me all the time. So it's good that I have a young guy who's interested and maybe one day would want to take my job. Or actually, he doesn't live in my district, but pretty close to.
Yeah, right on the border.
This year, Michael is a senior at Chartiers Valley High School, and Michael, I appreciate you being here. You're the future generation, and I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you, Representative Ortitay, and thank you to all the other representatives on the panel today for coming here and speaking. I want to thank you first and foremost for having an honest yearning to stand up for the Commonwealth's best interest as it relates to this unprincipled and negligent revenue bill, which does not help Pennsylvania's economy, does not help the average middle-class individual, nor the small business which creates jobs and economic stability for many hardworking Pennsylvanians. The recent revenue plan that was passed by the state Senate to fill the $2.2 billion hole in the state's unsigned budget is the complete antithesis, to what Republican lawmakers were elected to stand for. This bill, simply put, does absolutely no favors to the taxpayers and only exists to serve the bloated bureaucracy which governs our land. I've been a believer, and I continue to believe, that compromising some principles in order to get something accomplished is not an inferior trait and does not make you the bad guy. However, what the Senate Republicans have done in this bill is beyond compromising, it is outright surrendering. This bill includes a tax on natural gas, one of the largest employers in the state, a higher tax on cell phone service, home heating bills, electricity, and online purchases from such companies as Amazon and eBay. According to the Commonwealth Foundation, and I quote, the Senate's $571.5 million tax hike would cost a family of four nearly $180 in higher taxes. And of course, this is not new for Pennsylvanians. For the second year in a row, a tax hike has been the solution to balancing the budget, even with 100 vape shops closing in the process, just to throw it out there, and that's per the findings of the Commonwealth Foundation. 4 times in the past 9 years, the state has sold the idea of raising taxes to balance the budget as the solution to our woes. However, that simply is not the answer. We must be smarter and more innovative to solving our problems. For the Republican Party to be in control of the Senate and still be unable to pass a spending plan nor a revenue plan that lowers taxes and reduces spending while also achieving a balanced budget is a disservice to the men and women who makes this state's economy flow by having a portion of their hard-earned income go to the state and by working jobs which in effect create economic growth. Myself being a soon-to-be high school graduate who will be moving on to college and after 4 years of that into the workforce, I find it very troubling, very concerning that this has become one of the most taxed and regulated states in the nation, that this government seems to be wanting to hinder job and economic growth and wring out the last cent from the taxpayer. If this trend continues in plans and future budget plans and whatnot, you will see a greater migration than we have already seen with young adults and job creators moving out of the Commonwealth to more business-friendly and cost-living-friendly states. Now, I am aware that the Republican-controlled legislature has had to work with an uncooperative and hardline partisan such as Governor Tom Wolf, and if anything, it is my opinion that this budget stalemate reflects the worst on him and his leadership abilities. Yet, it was my hope that the lawmakers in the Senate, who I felt shared the same sentiment as me when it came to budgetary and overall fiscal matters, would stand up and could stand strong to the governor and force him to compromise for a change. However, that has clearly not occurred. Overall, it is my hope that with this budget stalemate continuing to play out, that the House rejects the Senate's plan, rejects this plan which will hurt Pennsylvania's families, individuals, and small businesses, and looks toward new solutions to fill the deficit so that we can put Pennsylvania back on a path toward fiscal prosperity. Lastly, it is my sincere hope that we can also work together, and truly work together, and have an honest discussion about what is right and what is wrong with our state's budget and with our state's economy. Thank you for hearing my voice today. And I hope that this testimony has resonated with the members of this caucus. Thank you again.
Thank you, Michael. Representative Dowling.
Michael, I just want to thank you for being here with us today. I do have to ask, are you able to vote yet?
I am not. Come the primaries in May of next year, I will be.
I am impressed and also very happy to hear you speak out for your constituency, a constituency which isn't able to speak for themselves through the electoral process. And I think it's so important that we look at what we're doing to future generations, to our kids, our grandkids, and so forth. as I'm sure the Commonwealth Foundation or AFP would back me up in saying, once we start a new tax in Pennsylvania, it's almost impossible or very difficult to repeal. So you're going to be living with the decisions that are made today. Not really a question, but I just want to commend you for being here with us, and also to call attention to the fact that you're representing a constituency that really doesn't have a voice in this, but is affected a great deal.
Thank you.
Representative Grove.
Really in high school?
Yes.
Very impressive.
Thank you.
So you seem to like economics a lot. When government pulls dollars out of the economy, shifts them to the coffers in Harrisburg, and distributes them to a minority of winners, what do you think happens to the overall economy?
I think the economy suffers.
Suffers.
Point
What would you
blankly.
say the natural gas tax you were talking about was actually repealed about 20 years ago?
I'd be very surprised to hear that.
Yeah, it was actually repealed, and now we're looking at reinstituting that tax moving forward. Which one of the reasons it was removed was to reduce costs on manufacturing and homeowners when they purchase natural gas at a point when we didn't even have the Marcellus Shale or Utica Shale finds here in Pennsylvania. So there's probably some wisdom in leaving dead taxes kind of dead, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would agree.
Well, all right. Thank you very much. And what do you think the impact on your school district is? Probably heat, electricity, natural gas.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I was talking with somebody else here. I believe we talked about it beforehand, the impact it would have on my school in terms of the heating, in terms of the electricity and all that different stuff. And we talked about the cost of it would be very high. To put it in layman's terms, it would be very high.
So it would force your school board to make decisions on, with new energy bills coming down through taxes, raising taxes, cutting programs, making those kind of determinations at the local level. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael. Fantastic job. I will write you a letter to Mr. Harhigh if you need some extra credit. I know school hasn't started yet, but I'm sure everybody up here would be willing to do the same.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you so much, Representative Ortitay and others who came here today to talk about the critical issues that are facing our state. So thank you again.
You're welcome, and I hope others follow in your footsteps as well with the youth and their involvement, not just in politics, but in policy in general. So thank you for being here. Your mom should be proud, just like I said in the beginning.
I'm sure she is.
All right, Mark, we're moving on to you now.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Caskey. I'm the founder and president and chief bottle washer of a company called Steel Nation in Washington, Pennsylvania. But before I get started here, I want to give you some props on there. Man, if I could speak like that when I was not even 18 years old, the sky's the limit, my man.
Well, thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
I don't think we'll be seeing Michael at any of these Antifa rallies anytime soon in your illustrious career. Thank you very much. Again, Mark Caskey with Steel Nation. We're in the oil and gas business, and I want to talk about the severance tax directly, and I want to talk about the DEP, the trade-off with that a little bit as well. I don't have pre-typed notes. I've got a lot of handwritten notes and that I want to share with all you. And thank you for having me, Jason. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak. So Steel Nation I founded in a spare bedroom in 2008. 2008 was the low point of the recession. It was just at the start of just a few years after the initial Wren's well was found. That was the first hydraulic fractured well on this side of the Mississippi. I was previously in the coal business, working for another company. We build coal prep plants. In about 2008, in the election of the Obama administration, we knew coal was going downhill. I mentioned coal because you can see what government intervention did to coal. Yeah, a lot of that is natural gas is so much cheaper and cleaner, no doubt. But of course, as Mrs. Clinton said during, she wants to put coal out of business, and they came very close to putting coal out of business. So just the idea of a state government, a federal government has that much impact on an entire region of Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and even some of the western states is just dumbfounding to me. So when the Senate passed this bill a few weeks ago, Majority of those being Republicans, I understand, and a lot of those from the Philadelphia area. It makes me angry. It really makes me angry. I started Steel Nation in 2008 in a spare bedroom with $6,000 to my name. This year, we're pushing. We did 25 million last year. We're pushing 30 million this year. We have over 103 people out in the field: project managers, engineers, carpenters, steel erectors, concrete workers, and electricians mainly. We work mainly in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, but we also go into New York. We work into Michigan, Texas, Kentucky, and Virginia. Of all those states that are doing business, I think you all know this, Pennsylvania is probably the hardest to do business in regulatory and income tax, state tax, and all those other things. When I started the business, I should have listened to my lawyers and incorporated in Delaware like most big companies do. And I said, no, I'm not. This is my home. This is where I live. I'm going to pay my fair share of taxes. Every year I pay 6 figures in Pennsylvania income tax. And I gladly pay it. And I write that check out, every spring. And it's hard to do. As a company, we pay in sales tax and in other state taxes about $3 to $4 million a year already. So there's a lot of money involved with just doing business in Pennsylvania versus some of those other states that we could be in. Mr. Brewer said it best he's not here right now, but on looking at, is it cheaper to do business in Ohio and West Virginia? It definitely is, no doubt. The regulatories are so much easier, those types of things. So Steel Nation, we build compressor plants, we build gas processing plants, and transmission plants in most of the states I just talked about. We have our offices in Washington, PA on Route 19 near the Meadows. We have an engineering office up in Wexford, and we also have an environmental division in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. So even though we're not in your district, we're in Brandon Newman's district. So it's important to us, and our employees are not from Texas and Louisiana and some of the other strong drilling states that kind of set the stage for us, 50 years ago. We're all Pennsylvanians. I don't have any West Virginians or Ohioans that come over. We're all here, and a majority of us live in Allegheny County, Washington County, into parts of Westmoreland County. We're very local, even though we travel a lot. So what happened 3 weeks ago with the Senate, I've already had a couple projects. I had one project canceled, and it wasn't a big project, but I've had many others delayed. Oil and gas drillers right now are really looking at you guys hard. I'm part of the Marcellus Shale Coalition. We're in Scranton, Pennsylvania last week, approximately 500-600 people, leaders of the industry from drillers on down to suppliers like ourselves, vendors. And it's on everybody's mind. It really is. When I look back into the 1970s, I graduated from high school in 1980, so I'm 55 years old, to give you an idea. Okay? And I wish I could speak as well as you in 1980. In the 70s, the city of champions, we are family, 4 Super Bowl rings. Penguins haven't really caught on fire yet. But in about 1978, big steel started falling down. A lot of that were Japanese imports, a lot of regulatory problems, union problems. We could write books on the decline of big steel in Pittsburgh, western Pennsylvania, and even into Youngstown and parts of West Virginia as well. But I often think if this was 1978 all over again, all of a sudden our illustrious political leaders decided to tax one industry and they went after steel, there would be riots in the street, right? What is the only industry that has really come back where we're making stuff, material handling, we're shipping water, we're making parts, big steel is back a little bit. Our steel comes from right here in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, and also out of Altoona, Imler, Pennsylvania. It's not Chinese steel, it's not Japanese steel. So why all of a sudden do we go after one industry? And I'm going to ignore the telecommunications at this point because I don't know enough about the cell phones and things like that. I'm just going to talk about gas. But why just center on one industry? It's amazing to me. And those 500-600 people that I talked to last week in Scranton, they're the same way. And I know we've been fighting this since the Rendell administration, but why just one industry? Yeah, we just got through in 2015. We had the decline. We saw all those taillights going back to Texas. We saw a lot of people leaving back for Louisiana, the Wyoming, and Colorado. Now we have mostly Pennsylvanians. A majority of us are working in this industry. So many people I work with have moved here from Texas, from Louisiana. Look at the real estate market. 3 years ago at the height was 2014. 15 started crashing for a lot of different reasons. If you talk to any of your constituents that are real estate agents, the price of homes have dropped. And that's a big ticket item when you're looking at a $100,000 home, $400,000, $500,000 home. And some of these engineers that are coming here, that's their market, the $500,000 homes. That's hurting right now. If we look at, I wanted to say something else. Let me get in the DP in a minute. I'm a member. I was appointed member by Brandon Newman about 3 years ago to the DEP CAC, Citizens Advisory Council. I want to talk about the DEP, but I want to give you a little more background on myself as well. So we had this crash, and we had empty hotels, all these hotels that were built in Allegheny County. Now they're being built near the Shell Cracker plant in Beaver County. Who's from Beaver? He's sitting here, I'm sorry. We have all this investment into this very new industry that's been under our feet for millions of years. And now this tax, those hotels are going to start getting empty again. The restaurants are going to decline. The number of people that are buying homes. It has a huge impact. It really does on every one of us that are here. Just to set the stage a little bit, since the start of really fracturing in 2005, 2006, so 10, 11 years, over $1.2 billion has been put back into taxes on just the impact tax, where we stand today. $1.2 billion. That's an amazing thing right there. Right now the tax rate with just the impact is 9.16%. Let's call that 10%. That's a lot. That is higher right now. The impact tax brought in $173 million in 2016. And you hear the adage that, well, we don't have a severance tax, and every other state has a severance tax. It's much smaller. Okay, if you add up all the collections of Ohio, West Virginia, Arkansas, and Colorado, and combine them, they would not reach $173 million from the impact. So now, if we want to add more to this, I need to talk about the price of gas. The price of gas is around $3 MCF. Okay, on the markets, there's so much Marcellus gas because there's not enough major pipelines that have been approved right now and users. We heard that this is gonna bring so many manufacturing companies back, and we're crashing and scrawling trying to get these manufacturers back here and working with our local reps. I told Camera Barletta, and I get her name. It's a hard name to pronounce. I told her just a few weeks ago. I said, we're not bringing in the manufacturers because the business climate in Pennsylvania is too hard to do. There's too many things. So we're not seeing what Texas saw and what New Orleans saw in all their processing plants. We're seeing one big Shell bringing a cracker plant to Beaver County, and it's going to help Beaver County. But we're not seeing all these manufacturers come in. We put more severance tax, they're going to run as fast as they can for the hills, and they'll go back to Texas and Colorado and Louisiana, no doubt. So the price of the actual Pennsylvania gas is about $1.75 as compared to the national average, which is right around $3, $2.98, I think it was today when I checked every morning. It has a big impact on us. We've got 100 people out there, and talking about families and that 2.3 multiplier, 400 or 500 families. These are well-paying jobs. We have people out there that are making well over $250,000 a year. We have people. Our lowest person in our small little company made $60,000 last year. These are really good-paying jobs, and if the oil and gas, if we see our friends go back to Texas and Louisiana and all that capital dry up, I'm going to have to start laying people off. Mr. Brewer that was here earlier is going to have to start people. Material handling the same way. So the whole idea of taxing just our industry into prosperity, it's not going to happen. Ronald Reagan told us that how many years ago, right? So my final thing is not really economics. Ultimately, it is economics, is I get to see the DEP up close and personal. As part of this bill, the DEP apparently would have to speed up the permits for the air permits for natural gas as a trade-off to this severance tax. Okay, about 5-6 years ago, when the industry was really building up, we could go to the DEP and get a permit, and it would take 30 to 60 days. Okay, and you have to go to different offices. Our office here is in Greene County, also one in Washington County as well. Right now, the southwestern DEP is taking 8 to 9 months to get the regulatory permits. Maine is air quality permits. Up in northeast Pennsylvania, it's still 1 or 2 months. Why is that? Why is it harder down here? You know, there's some politics being played somewhere. I'm not smart enough to understand it, and I'm not that close to the DP as being part of the Citizens Advisory Council to really know the answer to that. I see a lot of shenanigans, but I don't know. I see the revolving door of the secretary every 8 or 9 months, you know, spinning around and, you know, leaving and coming and going. So, in closing, it's a great industry. We lost big steel when I graduated from high school in 1980. My dad was in the steel business. His business failed in 1979. He was a supplier of welding products to the steel industry. By 1980, the IRS took my dad's house. I couldn't go to college after I had nothing to go to. I had to work 3 years to build up some money before I went to school. We've seen the decline of one industry. Let it happen to Pennsylvania, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Representative Dush.
Thank you, Mark. You touched on something I wanted to originally ask Adam coming up here, but the NYMEX versus the Henry Hub prices. This Senate bill, I just want this part of the record for everybody to understand too, is based on the NYMEX price. So the tax that will be charged, regardless of what our businesses in Pennsylvania are bringing in for and what the price is getting it to market at $1.75 now versus about $3.07 I thought it was on the NYMEX, you're looking at a 40% increase in tax based on something that's speculation. It's not even based on reality. So that I have a significant problem with when they're taxing based on something that we're not actually selling at.
Right.
Thank you for bringing that up.
That discounted rate is so important. You know, we have a lot of gas in the Marcellus Shale. There's no doubt. You know, Susquehanna County being the #1 producer of dry gas, Washington County, we're just across the border out here, 8 miles away, we're #2. But there's parts of West Virginia, Ohio, we're all a part of that same hub. It's all discounted rate up here because we don't see the demand. It's a shrinking demand, no doubt.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you taking time out of your
Thank you,
schedule.
everyone.
Got it. All right. Ms. Kubiak, you're up.
Good morning. Thank you, Representative Ortitay, and all members of the caucus. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some remarks on the current revenue plans being discussed in Harrisburg on behalf of Duquesne Light Company. My name is Krisha Kubiak, and I work at Duquesne Light. Duquesne Light is an electric distribution company. We serve almost 600,000 customers in Allegheny County and Beaver. We certainly recognize and appreciate the difficult task in front of lawmakers as you seek to find solutions to the state's budget deficit. But we are concerned that the proposals to balance the budget will place additional taxes on energy consumers. Currently, the rates charged by electric distribution companies include a tax on the gross receipts of electricity at the rate of 5.9%. The Senate has proposed increasing that tax to the tax rate of 6.5%. which would result in an increase in electricity bills for our consumers and for customers across the state. Since regulated utilities recover state tax payments through rates, these increases will be directly felt by our customers. Pennsylvania's energy resources are a competitive advantage for the state, and we are concerned about balancing the budget by making energy more expensive for customers. not only would residential customers see an increase in what they pay for electricity, but more energy-intensive commercial customers would be significantly impacted. Again, Duquesne Light appreciates the budgetary challenges the state is facing, but we remain concerned about continuing to solve these challenges by using utilities as tax collectors and increasing energy costs for our consumers. Thank you for your time and attention.
Representative Grove?
How does a gross receipts tax work? I'm not sure too many people understand what it is and how it operates.
So it operates as a tax on your entire electric bill. So there are three parts of your electric bill. There's the distribution rates, the supply rates, where you get your energy from, and there's also the transmission rates. The gross receipts tax works on all three portions of those bills, so it will just add on a percentage that won't go to us, but will just go to the state.
And literally, it's not like a, quote, business tax. I mean, you're literally just collecting it from
Right.
directly from the consumer.
Exactly. It is not. It will not be paid by the electric companies. It will be paid by the consumers.
Yeah. Can I go back to Mark real quick? Severance tax. Argument is always it's not on the consumer. Consumers won't feel it. It's on the industry. The natural gas industry, big natural gas. So the individual consumer won't feel that in their energy bill.
The natural gas companies will certainly pass it on. There's no doubt.
Directly pass it
Just
on.
how Duquesne Light would pass it on, or Columbia Gas, any utility. We're gonna the natural gas, and we're not a driller, so I can't speak for drillers. But certainly it's going to be more expensive, especially for the gas here in the Marcellus Shale and the Utica Shale in Ohio as well. What the other tax is that gross receipts tax that I think just about everyone at the table has talked about. A couple $100 a year hitting low income people. That hurts, no doubt.
So we have a tax on the drillers coming out, which then would go to the processors. So what percentage of your portfolio of energy creation comes from natural gas? Because I know that's a growing amount here in Pennsylvania.
It is, and so we look at the PJM market, and it's certainly natural gas has recently in the last year taken over coal for the largest percentage of electricity of generators that use natural gas. So currently, and we anticipate that those numbers will only increase in the years to come. So in the PJM footprint, they are the largest percentage of electricity comes from natural gas plants.
So that price they pay is going to be higher, so they'll pass that cost on to you.
Correct.
And then that cost will then be calculated into the higher gross receipts tax as well.
Yeah, and so consumers, because we have an electric choice state, so they can choose their own generation supplier. So it's not necessarily that they're buying it from Duquesne Light, but whichever company they use and electric generation supplier that they use, they will be paying those higher rates.
And then you got to figure the telecoms industry will be purchasing electricity, but they get a telephone tax on top of that. And then, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Can I make a comment on? Thank you. We have very low gas prices. We'll stick with the NYMEX at $3. Where were we at 8 or 9 years ago was $12. Okay, so we're about 25%, if my math is correct. I'm not as smart as Michael here. But think about that. Somebody said that gross receipts tax is really going to, $200 a year. What if the natural gas price goes back to 12? And who says it can't? So take that 200. That's only 25%. That could be up to $800 or $1,000 a year for low income people. That hurts.
Representative Nelson?
Thank you. My question, kind of circling through from Mrs. Clutter's earlier testimony on the difficulty of a fixed income and the consequence. At Duquesne Light, not that we want to be overly emotional, but when we see it's very difficult not to use gas and not to use electricity as a senior, where do you see this gap being made up when you have 600,000 customers? So if I'm doing the math, a majority of senior environment, that would put maybe 300,000 customers more on the senior range. So what happens to that large group of people during these tight times.
Who start having troubles. I mean, as we discussed the increase of the LIHEAP, they certainly rely on some state programs and federal programs, but LIHEAP caps out. So every single year, there is not enough money to cover the people who are unable to pay their electric bill. Those are also a certain category of income customers, but I'm also concerned about the people who are making just over that, because you could be making $50 or $100 over that limit and no longer qualify for these amounts, and yet you're seeing increases that are higher. So both, all of these customers start to have energy burdens that really, and then there's choices between, which bills they pay, which gets very difficult for people.
I know personally there's a frustration that I think that an additional intangible consequence is that we drive more people to be dependent on a new form of government in order to be able to have the basic substance to be able to live. And that runs counter to the self-reliance. That's the strength that we are as Pennsylvania, and historically we've been for individuals to be able to manage and deal within their own realms. And one of the side effects of that additional taxes is just pushing more people into government dependence. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Representative.
You got it. Adam, you're batting clean up here. Thanks for being here.
Everyone in the door. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here, and other panelists also. I think certainly being last gives me the opportunity to have heard, and for all of you to have heard many of the comments that I believe Columbia Gas would have made. So I will keep my testimony fairly brief and high level. My name is Adam Lanier. I'm the Director of Rates and Regulatory for Columbia Gas of Pennsylvania, which is a natural gas distribution company that provides natural gas service to more than 426,000 residential, commercial, and industrial customers who rely on us for their energy needs. Should House Bill 542 pass as currently written, natural gas customers will pay two new taxes, as everyone has mentioned before me, including the 5.7% proposed gross receipts tax on natural gas distribution, which is used to, many of the panelists here, to manufacture their products, heat their homes or businesses, cook their food, heat their showers. Right now, if we would calculate it to date, Columbia's average bill is around $90 a month. Applying some specific factors on that to gross up the gross receipts tax to collect it for the state, that would be an additional $544 a month for each individual customer on average, which totals out to around $65 a year. We believe that taxes specifically on natural gas customers unfairly burden them to pay the cost for state government, while other citizens escape such increased costs, citizens who may heat their home with heating oil or other energy sources that aren't burdened by this tax. Additionally, I would add that it would create a disproportionate impact on low income and even moderate income customers who heat their homes with natural gas. Many of these customers can live in older homes, may lack sufficient insulation, newer windows, more energy efficient furnaces, and these customers tend to use more natural gas. And therefore would bear a greater burden as a result of the gross receipts tax. I would also add, as many other panelists have pointed out, the impact on the energy intensive commercial and industrial customers that we have would also bear a very disproportionate percentage in terms of the impact of them. We believe that House Bill 542 is really contrary to the policies that many of our regulators have set, and to see the benefits from low energy prices, the creation of jobs, making energy affordable, efficient energy affordable, just doesn't make sense to Columbia Gas. With this gross receipts tax, we believe energy prices will rise, and frankly, it's disappointing with a state with such a great asset in the Marcellus and Utica basins underneath of it. Thank you.
Representative Cook.
I tend to notice things, okay? And I notice that everybody to the right of the representative that here are freshmen, and on the left side of him are our senior members. And as a freshman, Coming out of a business background, being in office for 8 months, the worlds that collide with business and government is astounding. Absolutely astounding. And I'm going to give you an example. I have these little stories. There was a child and her mom, and they were cooking the ham, and the mom's cutting the edge off the ham bone, and the daughter says, "Why did we do that?" She says, "I don't know, ask your grandmother." So she goes and asks her grandmother, and she says, "I don't know, go ask your great-grandmother." So she calls her up on the phone, and she says, "Honey, years ago, I only had a pan so big, and the only way I could get the ham in the pan was by sawing off the end of the ham bone." In government, we do things over and over and over again because that's the way we've always done it. And I'll give you an example. About 3 months in, we got business cards. We all have our business cards up here, and I took a look at it. Mine had a fax number on it. Now, I can tell you that I have not used a fax machine in 10 or 15 years, but yet we still have the fax number on our business cards. Finally, having been a business person, can you imagine Walmart raising their prices to get more people into their store? What do we do in the Commonwealth? Come do business in the state of Pennsylvania, we're going to raise your taxes. Well, what a deal that is. We have got to break that cycle. You have to share with your friends, your fellow businessmen, your fellow citizens out there. Pay attention to what's going on in Harrisburg. You have two types of people, those that are there to do the job and those that are there for a job. We need more like up here, guys.
Representative Dush.
Thank you. I just want to thank all the testifiers. This type of a hearing actually helps us to round out the picture so that everybody can see it, from the gas providers to the electricity that has to be produced to the people that manufacture the equipment that gets the gas and the electricity out there, the people who are using the gas and the electricity to generate products and services, and the everyday homeowner who has to suffer through the higher rates, as well as the overall economic impact to the Commonwealth. And this panel has proven to just give that full picture. The Taxpayer Caucus is made up of some people. People asked me years ago, what difference are you going to make when I first ran? And I'm only in my second term. But I said, I saw, as Beth Ann had said, a growing number of people down there who were taking a stand, and I wanted to go down and help increase that team and build that team. And most of us up here are in our first or second term. This team is growing. You are getting better representation down there. And I think it's, and I will say this, there are some people down there who have been fighting for many, many years for this, but have felt disheartened because they haven't had the kind of support that is growing now. I'm grateful that the people around the Commonwealth are starting to send folks who are willing to do the digging. But our intention in this caucus is that there's $2.2 billion here that people want to take out of the economy, out of the homeowners' hands, out of the business owners' hands, and use that for other purposes. We're working hard to keep that $2.2 billion out in the economy because we know that generates even more economic stimulus. It's growth. It's the way America does things. And, you know, being here in the Southwest with Pittsburgh, our greatest export in the last 40 years, basically, Mark, since you said, has been, since the time we graduated, has been our working class kids. There's not a state in the United States doesn't have a Steelers bar in it. And I was talking with the Consul General of Canada a few months back, and I told her, I said, Madam Consul General, you've got 4 in Toronto. I want those people back. I think we all want our families back. I'm tired of seeing them exit the migration outward, especially here in Western Pennsylvania. It's our working class people who are leaving because they're leaving to find jobs. Some of the guys with the gas industry that came in here, they got good jobs with the gas industry, and then they turned around and had to leave to stay with an industry they loved. Again, I want to thank the whole panel. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you.
Representative Dush, I just want to follow up on that. 15 short years ago, I graduated high school and moved out of Florida, in 2004, so it would have been about 13 years ago. I moved to Florida after I graduated college, and the sole reason for that was because I couldn't find a job here. And here we are in 2017. We had a little bit of a comeback several years ago. It was nice to see that. But now I'm starting to see it again. It's starting to fall off, and people are leaving. And, we have great educational programs in schools here in this state at the college level, both private and public. And, we educate them, and then they just go away. And the more we keep raising taxes, the more we continue to raise revenue for government spending, because I think we all agree that government knows how to spend your money better than you do. I say that sarcastically, just in case you don't know me. I was glad to join this caucus to help fight for the people who actually pay the bills for the state, to bring some recognition to them. I appreciate everybody here who is willing to share their story. I know it's not easy. This has been a big learning curve for me. As it's been alluded to, a lot of us are new members up here, one or two terms, and we look up to other members like Representative Grove and others in leadership. And when we pass this budget, I don't mean to make you feel old, Seth, not at all. When we passed the 31, I believe it's $31.2 billion budget back in, help my memory here, April? Was it April? And then to have it sat on for 2 months, 2 days before the budget was actually due, before anything was ever done with it, was disappointing. Because after the last couple years, I think we all recognized that the way that we do budgeting in the state government had to change. And it was evident to me that that didn't happen this time. We tried in the House. We got it over to the Senate. It sat there. Even the governor was late to the party. I think we saw him come maybe 2 or 3 days before. And exactly. So, we tried as a House to put together a budget this year that made some cuts. They were some hard decisions, but, as we talked about, there are things to cut in government. There are things that we can do to reinvent government, to make it better and to make it work better for the people who actually pay the bills. So with that said, we're going to continue, even though we have a $32 billion budget, which is about $800 million more than what we had passed in April, from a governor who didn't even sign the spend number, but came to the negotiating table and wanted actually $1 billion more than what we signed, and then just let it go into law. I think that he and the Senate should be open to cutting spending of the money that we passed, and open to our revenue streams that we put on the table. I think they were fair and adequate, and I think that it was better than the plan that was sent to us. And I'd like to see more leadership out of the governor's office. I'd like to see him step up and provide a plan that he thinks that we can pay for $32 billion and provide growth, because I have not seen a plan that provides any economic growth whatsoever, that brings any jobs back to this state, that helps any small businesses, any businesses in general. And if we're ever going to keep our young people here in the state of Pennsylvania, we need to be able to find jobs for them. But instead, we continue to pass tax increases that force them to leave and make it harder for people on fixed incomes to pay their bills and stay in their homes. I know why people would retire to Florida. I was there for a couple years. It's not hard to see that. And we've watched the governor of Florida come to Pennsylvania and poach our businesses away, and other states have done that too. Why isn't our governor out trying to poach businesses away from other states? That's what we should be doing. That's for the taxpayers here. That's for everybody in this room and everybody across the state. So that's kind of my vision. I know it's been alluded to in the press through the various papers across the state that the House Republicans are not working and they're telling us to get back to work. I can assure you that everybody sitting up here has been working. Just because we're not sitting in the halls of Harrisburg does not mean that we're not looking for plans, looking for ideas, and looking for solutions. As we talk right now, our leadership team is meeting in Harrisburg. So we are working. We're working for the taxpayers. We're not working for the special interests out there. So I'm glad you guys could share your stories. I'd like to recognize Representative Grove for any final comments he might have, and then I will get off my soapbox.
Actually, if it's okay, I do have some questions. Is that all right?
Of course it is. You're the chairman.
Just for the utilities, I know you mentioned some people will get hit with the gross receipts taxes. Do you have a geographic breakdown? I mean, where I live in my neighborhood, I'm a med ed. Other half of my neighborhood is Adams Electric, which is a co-op, which wouldn't get hit with the electric gross receipts tax, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So it's only if you are of Penelec or Duquesne Light or Med Ed, West Penn, you would be hit by that. But if you are part of a municipal electric co-op, you wouldn't be. So it isn't also fair at one level, because it depends on where you live, on whether or not. And for the natural gas, of course, don't mean this, but if you have oil for heat, you wouldn't hit this gas. You would, but if you have natural gas for heat, you would.
Gotcha. Okay. Elizabeth, S&P is hitting us hard right now because they want to give us a downgrade because our finances aren't complete. I was reading an interesting story on Kansas. Now, Kansas cut taxes, decided to jack up spending. They just increased taxes. I believe income tax, they did a big income tax increase, maybe sales tax. But S&P actually downgraded their bonds, or threatened to downgrade their bonds also, because they still have a structural deficit within their budget. How does that happen that you do huge tax increases and still have a structural deficit?
Well, we've been doing that for a long time,
Yeah.
so you should be well versed. Yeah, we're excellent at that. And the credit downgrading, it's a bit of a red herring. What they're really concerned about is the disconnect between revenue and spending. So there's two ways to solve that problem. You can reduce spending, control your spending, or you can raise your revenue. So I think sometimes you see that in the media saying the only way we can, avoid this downgrade is if we raise our revenue, and that's completely false. The same thing was said about pensions, and we reformed them, it was still possible. So I think we have to be careful about, the kind of the fire alarms sometimes that get thrown around to say we have to do this now or else. That's why I wanted to talk today about, the cycle that we're in and how it's important to not lose sight of the bigger picture in Pennsylvania, which is we've been raising taxes for a really long time and it's not working. And I know Representative Grove, you asked a couple questions about the gross receipts tax. I think it's of interest to know that most states are getting rid of their gross receipts tax. If you look at the trend nationwide, Tax Foundation just did a study last year showing states that have recently reduced or eliminated gross receipts tax because they recognize it's a terrible model. It's a pyramiding model. It's a regressive tax a lot of times, and it's very destructive. So even if you're going to talk about tax hikes, gross receipts tax are some of the most damaging that you can throw into the mix. So that just one of many, many reasons why there are a lot of better ways to go about growing Pennsylvania.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate, Jason, you hosting this, and I appreciate the members taking an interest. Obviously, we've been battling financial problems within the Commonwealth for a number of years. Now, I'm a firm believer if you have $2.8 to spend, you don't decide to spend $3 because you don't have the money to spend it. Pennsylvania obviously needs to operate more in that fashion, more in the realities of what our finances bring in. And those finances are billions upon billions of dollars already collected from the taxpayers of Pennsylvania, and respecting their ability to continue and sustain those taxes are of paramount interest. And the only way we fix this is go after those cost drivers that balloon our budgets by hundreds of millions of dollars each and every year. If we do not bend the cost curve of Pennsylvania, we will be sitting here year after year after year talking about how do we fund this budget, where are the revenues going to come with to try to fix our spending addiction. So I think through the Taxpayers Caucus report, which was issued last May, focusing on economic growth, focusing on budget reform, focusing on the structural changes that we need to make here in Pennsylvania to make Pennsylvania sustainable for the residents of Pennsylvania to grow business. And, the best revenue generation I know of is to give someone a job. nothing beats it. Nothing beats it. The empowering nature of individuality and making sure they're a productive member of society fulfills probably every predominant virtue and ideology and thought that our founding fathers wanted out of this great country. So I think that's our goal, and I think through our continued work within the Taxpayers Caucus, we'll make sure those policies come to fruition. And if you're bored, I think, Chris, you wanna invite everybody up to your neck of the woods on Tuesday?
Certainly. We are, like I said earlier, this is the second of the hearings, and the third will be in my district, beautiful Brookville, Pennsylvania. I would love to have anybody come up there. It's at the Heritage House. It's 4 Sylvania Avenue in Brookville. And I hope to have just as excellent and outstanding panel as this with some of the people from the more northern regions of western Pennsylvania. And again, thank you guys all for showing up.
All right, I'd like to thank my colleagues for venturing over to the 46th District. Also like to thank the panelists for providing testimony, answering our questions, and being good sports all the way around. And also everybody in the audience, if you didn't get I know we didn't get a chance to get to you guys today, but we're gonna stick around, so we're happy to talk to you so you guys can be heard, and I'll stick around for as long as you would want. Also like to thank Bridgeville Fire Department again. They provided us with this space today, and I'm very appreciative for all the things that they not only do for me, but my office and the residents here in Bridgeville. So thank you all for coming out. I appreciate the opportunity to hold this hearing, and I look forward to speaking with all of you. Thank you.